Hi everyone, welcome to our review of Star Trek The Next Generation. Today we are doing Hide and Q, and this is the 10th episode of the first season. And today I'm in the penalty box.
Hide and Q. En route to a mining colony disaster to render aid, the Enterprise is stopped and pestered once again by the omnipotent Q. Without much explanation about why he is bothering them again, a comment from Riker inspires Q to throw the crew into a deadly game on a TV soundstage covered with sand and styrofoam rocks, being poorly passed off as an alien planet. Riker and Q sip lemonade and chit-chat about humanity and games, and after Tasha interrupts, Q sends her to the penalty box. The penalty box is the Enterprise bridge where she spends some time teary-eyed and awkwardly hitting on Picard for some reason. On the planet, the crew face off against grunting aliens in fake beards and old-timey French uniforms. Q gives Riker the power of the Q, and Riker uses it to send everyone back to the Enterprise. Then, once again, Riker and Q chat and wax poetic about humanity's future, and when Riker rejects Q's offer to power, Q returns the crew to continue the battle with the grunting aliens, who are comically slow in combat but manage to take out Worf and impale Wesley. Riker can't help but use the Q powers to save everyone. Suddenly, Riker gets all smug with his new godlike status, and Picard tries to convince him not to be seduced by his newfound powers. They continue on to the mining colony disaster, and Riker refuses to revive a dead girl to prove that he can resist the power of the Q, but then feeling bad about that, he tries to give the Enterprise crew various gifts. We get to see Wesley as a grown man who doesn't look one bit like Will Wheaton. A nice moment where Geordi is given normal eyesight, and an awkward moment where Worf engages in some sexy Klingon foreplay right in front of the whole bridge crew. Finally, the senior staff all reject Riker's gifts, and Riker learns his lesson. Q is whisked away by the Continuum for failing to succeed in convincing Riker to join them.
I guess we're all in the penalty box reviewing this episode.
Felt like that.
What did you think of the episode, Namir?
I was surprised that I liked it. And I know I can already see Alan's reaction. But I did. I don't know what to tell you. Like I think it has that first season kind of goofiness, but I think for that is kind of consistent across a lot of Star Trek episodes. But I thought it was pretty well written. I liked Q coming back. It has some interesting, really cool moments. It hung together as a story. There was some parts that I was like, I don't really get that, or that's a little bit awkward. But overall, I think it was a solid episode. So so far, like for the first season, I think there's been way more really good episodes than not one. So I don't know. We'll see if this string of hits continues.
Well, I feel it's funny how you started it by saying, I'm surprisingly I like this episode when you've loved all the other episodes. So it's not a surprise at all.
I guess I surprised myself. I don't know.
I'd be surprised if you didn't like this episode. This one is way better than most of the ones that you thought were 10 out of 10. So,
What are you talking about? I don't think I've given any episode a 10 out of 10.
I know, but in your heart you wanted to.
I give you a 10 out of 10.
Yeah. For this one, I brought some visual aids, which you probably can't see because they'll all be backwards. But back in 1993, when the Hostess Chip Corporation had these little like episode foldouts you could collect, and they had 10 of them, and they were usually like key episodes. So we have like Best of Both Worlds, Redemption, I Borg, Unification, Emissary, Encounter Farpoint, the heavy hitters, the key episodes for the show. And for some reason, they did Hide and Q. And I have no idea why, because it is a turd. It's made a little more interesting this time around because I see possibly some connections to what's happening in the new Picard series. And then there's a few good character moments, but man, the rest of it is just pure goofy stupid, and it's fun to watch. I'll give it that, but I'm making fun of it the whole time because it's so much of it is terrible.
Well, we're definitely not in the creme de la creme of season 1 yet, but it's a lot better. I really like this episode. There's many season 1 flaws in it, be it cheesy effects or non-specific dialogue, like those creature animal things, that kind of stuff, and some overacting, but it really is the first episode that solidifies Q and creates his continuity with his character and his storyline, picking up from the encounter at Fort Point. So, yes, I always enjoy watching this episode. And I hadn't watched it in a while, so it was great to rewatch it.
Well, again, that's one of the good things about this episode is John Delancey's performance as Q. He's always, livens up the room, especially when he's dealing with such a stodgy, straight-laced crew as the Enterprise crew were portrayed there in the first season.
At our first meeting, you seized my vessel. You condemned all humans as savages. You again seized my vessel.
And that angered you, did it? Seized my vessel, seized my vessel.
And I appreciate the continuity too, because I think this is the first episode where we really see them referencing something they've already done. So it's nice to see that they acknowledge some events that already happened. It worked for me. I know some people don't. When it gets Q heavy, they tend not to like it, but yeah, I liked his presence. I mean, if it wasn't there, this would be really, 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 really bad.
So Q shows up. He stops the Enterprise from this rescue mission and takes this crew down to this fictitious planet, which is a great set, by the way. It looks so fake, but it kind of works because...
I was going to say, we're being sarcastic.
No, but I'll tell
It
you
doesn't
what
look that bad.
Worst set. It's so bad.
What? How is it so bad? It's not any worse or better than any of the other sets.
I think you're misremembering.
Alan, are you watching it in Ultra HD or something? You are. You're watching it in 4K. That's the problem.
Well, I'm watching it in HD, yeah, but no, I was like, I think, and this might be the last time they use that terrible set. I can't remember if they use it again, but then they get their Planet Hell set and like the cave, and that's better. I mean, it's still cheesy, but it's more in line with other productions of the time, where this one just looks straight up like 60s, where you get the styrofoam rocks and the monochrome, or, one color sky, and it's like just sand all over the place, and there's like no detail. It's so fake.
I think the problem is that we need to watch this show in the correct setting. We need to watch it like we would have watched it in the 80s and the 90s with like an old buzzy cathode ray tube. No, come on, you loved it back then.
No, I think it was cheesy. I think it was all like Alan was right. It was already dated at that point. That set is a direct lift from what they were doing in the original series. And it does look fake, but if you put that aside for a second, it's a great set. And the way I think that they did those sets is that backing is actually a white screen, and they used lights with green gels, and they would light it green. At least that's how they did it in the original series. So I assume that's how they did it here. And I think that the moons are like projected onto the backing. That somebody did the moons, in whatever version of Photoshop.
I love when Riker says, "A world so different from ours that it has 2 moons." I'm like, what? Like that's all you have to say?
But I don't think Q zapped him to the planet that was in trouble. I think he just zapped him to some random planet.
I think it's not even a real planet. I think it's like a figment of his imagination.
They zapped him to the original series.
I thought you guys were talking about the set, like the underground set when they beam in.
That one
and
is
then
a great set.
they save the people. That's a great set.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. It's that battlefield, the plains.
Oh yeah, I mean it's not great, but it's like the Last Outpost, right? It's the same level of quality. At this point, we're used to it.
At least then they had some cool stuff with like the crystals, and there was some dead tree branches and some fog. Like, there was some atmosphere to that one. This one is just clearly a soundstage with a backdrop and some styrofoam rocks. And it's
Well, they're not actually in space, Alan. They didn't explore space to film on a different planet.
Listen, they're here to try to get me to suspend my disbelief, and they didn't do it. They failed.
Okay, that's fair.
This game shall in fact be completely unfair.
You've gone too far.
Game penalty.
Tasha says, "You've gone too far, Q," and he snaps her to the bridge, but he says that she's in a penalty box. I'm awaiting Alan's comments.
He's too busy laughing.
Because that's what I wanted to name this review show, was the penalty box of tears. especially when we're doing season 1, because there's so much bad it makes you want to cry. But
I disagree.
Didn't know people would get the reference though, but maybe they would. Yeah, well, actually, I felt that was a little harsh. I'm like, I don't feel like that comment merited a penalty. I mean, especially after Worf said, it's like, we'd win if your rules are fair. Like, he had a little outburst too, and she didn't say anything any more confrontational than Worf did, but she got a penalty for some reason. I don't know. And then say that just led into that whole scene where, I mean, Namir will make fun of Discovery and all that, but man, this was a time when they were very over the top with the emotion. Like, I mean, I get what they were trying to do, that she was showing her, that she was frustrated with the the inability to do anything, but about her situation. But I feel like her character, was designed to be a tough exterior. Like, she grew up in a hard environment.
What in the hell am I doing? Crying?
Yeah, she wouldn't show that kind of emotion and vulnerability, with the character they were trying to establish her as. And then that awkward, I mean, you guys probably comments on this about, if you weren't the captain, it's like,
Oh, if you weren't a captain.
Is she hitting on him? I was like, this is a very awkward time to tell your captain that you think he's attractive, and if it was any other scenario, that she would be all over him.
It just came out of nowhere. The scene works so well because I buy it. I buy that she's super frustrated because she's dealing with an omnipotent being. He's all powerful, and if anybody else does anything wrong, Q just decides to wipe her out of existence. Like, it must be them.
You know what else is interesting here? Sorry, I interrupt. It's like he says game penalty, and then she disappears. But then he explains the penalty box to the people still on the planet. But then when she's up on the bridge, she's telling Picard that she's in the penalty box and this has happened. How does she know any of this has happened? Or that this is what's going to happen to her if she wasn't there when Q explained everything to the others after she was zapped back to the planet? That made no sense to me.
Because I think Q implanted that knowledge in her mind, because she even says it. She says, I don't know how I know this.
You're just making stuff up now.
No.
I didn't say it, so I don't believe it.
She said...
That was a plot hole.
No, I don't think she specifically says, I don't know how I know this, but I know that these are the rules.
It sounds strange, but it definitely isn't.
So that, to me, goes to show that he implanted the knowledge in her mind. Otherwise, because she acknowledges it, that she doesn't know how.
I watched it a couple times because I'm like, it was so bad. I was like, I need to
watch it again.
Really focus on what's... Yeah. I'm so busy laughing now. I need to go back.
Only a Star Trek nerd like you is like, this episode is so bad I need to watch it again.
When one is in the penalty box, tears are permitted.
I mean, I agree with Lucas. I mean, I think the Tasha's character is kind of strange, right? She's a little bit like two-dimensional, right? But her character is one that has a lot of strong emotions, right? And we see it throughout. We saw it in the very first episode, right? Like her first big scene with Q was her kind of losing her temper, right? So she kind of does that. She doesn't have control over her emotions in any real way. So I'm not surprised by it. I do think that she kind of gets pigeonholed a little bit as everyone's sort of love interest, like the character that everyone wants to is attracted to, you know, like in even Geordi at the end where he can see everything for the first time. He's like, "Oh, you're more beautiful than I ever imagined," you know, and you're kind of like, really? I mean, you know, there's probably other people on the bridge that are more attractive, but she kind of gets pigeonholed as that role. So I understand as an actor why you would be frustrated with that, right? Because that's just, you know, you become this one thing and that's it. But in the context of that scene, I do think that she, you know, that scene was fine. It made sense to me, even though it was a little cringeworthy.
It made sense up until she's like, "What am I doing, crying?" And he's like, "Tears are allowed in the penalty box." And she's like, "Man, if you just weren't the captain right now, I would totally do you." And you're like, "What? What does that have to do? What just came out of nowhere?"
Oh man, did somebody write that? Or did she ad-lib it? Like, my God, that's either terrible writing or a terrible improvisation.
Well, and I just imagine how embarrassing it must be after that mission.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I said that to the captain." Plus, he's Picard. Like, Picard is not, you know, it's not like she said it to Riker or somebody who's like. I guess that's good because Riker would be like, "Knock, knock, knock."
You know what you were saying earlier?
I have a free half hour or 10 minutes later on today. What does your calendar say?
Wait a minute, I make your calendar, so you're free right now.
Not good. And I'm not surprised that she quit the show, right? Because I bet that she was just getting more and more scenes like this and more scripts that was basically just doubling down on this scene.
Well, and it's interesting that you guys are talking about Tasha because it just made me realize that I don't think Counselor Troy is in this episode.
She's not.
No.
The first thing they say in this episode is, Counselor Troy is not in this episode.
So that's going to be the only woman on the bridge that Geordi has to ogle when he gets a sight.
No, right, Crusher's right there when it happens.
Oh,
yeah, Crusher's right there
too, right? Yeah, you're right. So yeah, I guess he had options.
Vicious animal things.
One thing that throws me in this episode is when they talk about the soldiers that Q has created that they're going to fight on this planet, and they refer to them or describe them as vicious animal things. And every time they talk about them, it's like they're like vicious animal things. Those things, the animal things. And I'm like, just call them creatures or soldiers, or it's not that complicated. Like, these guys are trained at Starfleet Academy. I'm sure they can come up with something better than vicious animal things.
Yeah, they're just biped humanoids in Earth Napoleonic era uniforms. Yeah. It's like, the uniforms might be human, but what is in them is not vicious animal things. I'm like, really, Worf? That's the best you come up with? I was like, maybe you're a vicious animal thing. You just look kind of like them. Rubber on your face.
That's
and
rough.
A beard. It's like...
What are you implying? Two out of three of us here have beards.
Well, no, but that's they kind of look like Worf, They got a beard, they got prosthetics on their face. I'm like, and he just calls them vicious animal things, and I'm like, well,
yeah, but they obviously don't have
description.
Worf's charming personality.
Like when he pours out his drink, that was a great moment.
I understand it, right? Because you have to convey the danger in the writing, right? Like, he has to be like, vicious animal things because they're dangerous, right? Like if
they
he was
weren't
like
dangerous, they were comically slow. Like anytime they were in combat, it's like.
But But I think that they're not, they're not real. Q made them, right? Like, so he controls the parameters, right? So he can make them faster, he can make them slower, or whatever, right? They're not like a real Napoleonic vicious animal thing race.
But it would certainly be more exciting if they were a lot faster than they were.
I don't know.
Slowly marching around, stabbing people, or shooting their muskets.
Maybe that's their race. Maybe their race is just very slow.
Yeah.
I really like, again, to get back to John Delancey in that scene. I really like the stuff when he's talking to Riker, and then he goes up to the ship and he's talking to Picard, and there's nothing better than they're both quoting Shakespeare. They're really good performers for that kind of language, and the theme of this episode carries over themes that we started to explore in Encounter at Farpoint, and then Where No One Has Gone Before. And I've mentioned this before, where it's this idea that humans are on a path of evolution and they're going to evolve eventually into something like the Q. And it's not something that we really see in the later seasons, but I like that element and the sort of philosophical parts of that. And then when he gives his powers to Riker, I think that's, when I saw this episode as a kid, that's the part that I really latched onto, where I was like, oh, that's a really interesting dilemma. Like, if I had the powers of Q, what would I do,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that I also really thought was, well, I mean, it's the core idea of the episode. And I think the really good Star Trek episodes are the ones that have this like, central dilemma. That's, there's a science fiction element, but there's also this central character dilemma, right? Like, if you were given ultimate power, could you give it up, right? Is essentially what this is about, right? And I think they do a good job of really demonstrating that, right? Of really writing that into the episode and keeping consistent and showing Riker's sort of progression from, oh yeah, no problem, this what, I'm not going to have any issues, keeping this promise, to throwing all these things in his way that make him change his mind. I thought that was really, really well done, and then they have the scene at the end where, he does like the handout of the gifts, and everyone's like, nah, I don't think so. Which I think is actually pretty good. I know probably that's been criticized, but I do think that that's a good way to end this episode, right? Because it has to be something that changes the way Riker thinks. Because they could have gone another way. They could have gone like the way of a similar episode in the original Star Trek, where I can't remember what it's called, but Kirk's friend is on the planet, and Kirk goes down and fights him on the planet, and he's got godlike powers. I don't know, Alan, what's that called? The episode I'm talking about?
Before, that's the second pilot.
Is it the second pilot? Okay, yeah, so that one. Where Kirk just kind of like fights him and then is able to defeat him that way, right? They could have done something similar in the Next Generation, where they suddenly, are put in a position where they have to capture him, or, something really obvious like that, but they don't. Right? They do it in a way that's really, really meaningful, and it is a real like character moment for Riker, because he's like, "Oh, I get it now," So I really, really like that about this episode. I think they wrote it in a really smart way.
I do see the core of this episode was a good premise. So my major gripe with it was that they spent so much time leading up to Q giving Riker the powers, and then him facing those ethical dilemmas with using them, because I feel like all that foolishness with the deadly games, and all that fighting those soldiers, that was just kind of a waste of time. Where the real meat of this was once he has powers, and the temptation that comes with that, obviously, and I mean, that was basically the back half of the episode. And that was a lot more compelling. I just feel like they thought that was going to be too talky, too boring. I don't know. But, and they had to throw in some action stuff. But, because that doesn't seem to add anything to it. That just gave the rest of the crew something to do, and put some action to the episode.
At Farpoint, we saw you as savages only. We discovered instead that you are unusual creatures in your own limited ways. Ways which in time will not be so limited.
Has Q seen some future now where something critical has changed with, Continuum's relationship with humanity, again, in the far future? That speech or that conversation, that was their motivation and their interest in humanity was almost like a fear of what we would become and wanting to guide us or, mold us, into something that they could either control or make sure that, that we stay on a path where we're not a threat to them. I don't know.
Well, and it brings up an interesting question. That it was the first time that I watched this episode, and it made me wonder, what is the power of Q? Like, what are the parameters of that power? Because I always assumed that they were, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-powerful. They could go through space and time. They knew the future. They knew the past. But they obviously don't know, because they would see that what happens at the end of the episode, that Riker refuses their gift. Or they would know for sure that humanity becomes like them, but they don't know. They're afraid that humans might become like that, So it's interesting in that it frames their power as like, they know a lot and they can do a lot, but there's a lot that they don't know. They're still bound by linear time in some sort of way, or not being able to read minds or predict the future or whatever.
Well, they're constantly meddling too, so that always has ramifications with how the timelines would split apart depending on how they influence the things that they interfere with.
This is when Namir falls asleep.
Sorry, are we not being funny? We're being too deep now?
It's too late. My memory of Q and Q episodes are him just coming in and leaving, but I think that's just because his character just appears and then leaves. So I'm not like tallying how much screen time he has, but he feels most of the time where he just comes in, causes havoc and then takes off. But this episode, you're right, is a little bit different. And actually, I kind of liked it. I like that about this episode, because you feel like you're starting to learn a little bit more about Q, because I don't really have a good sense of what Q actually is and what the Q continuum is. I don't know if they explain it in any of the other series or later on in Next Gen, but
it's a small town in the desert, Namir.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means.
He's a road in the middle of the desert.
Is that a reference?
Voyager.
Okay. People are really bored there. They watch magazines and they're out of the 1940s.
That's meaningless to me. I don't know what that means.
Watch Voyager, Death Wish, and Q in the Gray, and you'll see more about the Q continuum.
God, I will not. I will not watch Voyager.
Oh my God! Probably what he's thinking. Just watch Voyager. What is he doing?
I have very specific Star Trek that I like.
This apparently.
If we must play a game, what would we win?
The greatest possible future that you could imagine.
I really like Q in this episode, because I think it kind of gives you a window into who he is, and you kind of get a sense of his place in the Q continuum, right? Like, he's okay, and I don't really know, because I don't know Voyager, but I feel like he is not at the top of that pyramid, right? Like, he almost seems like he's a little bit like the whipping boy, who's new, who gets in trouble all the time. Like, there's this one little moment, and I like pointing out moments in episodes that I really find interesting, because they're kind of neat, where Tasha is in the penalty box on the bridge. He was like, okay, fine, you're out of the penalty box. And they have a shot of him after they say that where he's just kind of like, ugh, fine, whatever, and you get the sense where he's like, he's trying, but everything he does doesn't quite go his way. So he's like a little bit more reticent.
All the galaxy is a stage. World, not galaxy. All the world's a stage. Oh, you know that one. Well, if he were living now, he would have said galaxy.
He reminds me a lot, and I don't know if this is talked about, it must be, but they were almost like trying to make Q in the beginning like that Trelane type character. Not a kid, but, coming in, kind of messing things up, but also kind of doing it under the radar of, the parents, the adults in the room. And I'm not actually sure. Is Trelane a Q? Trelane's not a Q, right?
They never actually say, but they has been postulated in the books. They've said that he's a Q, but not officially.
Well, what I read is that when Roddenberry wrote Q, even before they had shot the episode, the pilot episode, the other writers from the original series were like, "Oh, this is Trelane," and so that comparison kind of was recognized right away. And there's been a lot of fan discussion about the connection between Trelane and Q, and is he a Q? And if I'm gonna throw my hat into this debate, that Trelane is not Q. Trelane's power came from this machine behind the mirror in the castle. So there was something mechanical, or it was a computer or some sort of like magic device that allowed him to do the things he was doing. Yet at the same time, when the parents show up at the end and he's like, "It's not fair," or whatever he says.
I don't want to go. I don't want to.
Oh yeah. And he goes, I don't wanna.
Just playing.
As he disappears.
I would have won.
No, Trelane.
I would have.
And I'm just thinking of that actor having to say "I don't wanna" like that like 25 times, and he's like, "Are we done now? Are we done? Oh, I don't wanna."
He's probably like a well-revered Shakespearean actor. He's played Hamlet on Broadway.
Yeah, that's Billy Campbell. I love that guy, but I like him better as Koloff. At the end of that episode, when the parents show up, and then he disappears, they don't seem related to the machine. Like they're not like they have magic powers, but do they have their own machines? Are they Q? So it's ambiguous. But anyways, I don't think he's Q.
Right, so he's not part of the continuum. Well, anyway, he has that same type of feel. Like, I can see that the Q character being based on Trelane to some degree. I really like Q in this episode. I think the way he was used was smart. And even though he was in it a lot, it was okay because it was kind of like a story about Q in some ways. The three-headed snake thing was weird at the start. Initially, I was like, "Oh, that's what the Q looks like," and then it's not.
They stuck 3 rubber snakes into a fishbowl and then put a key light or something in there. It's like, here's an alien snake. It's terrible.
And everybody bought it. I, for one, was convinced. I was like, "Oh, that's Q. Amazing."
Games? Did someone say games? To the game.
Really like how this episode develops the character of Q, and also is a sequel to Encounter at Farpoint. You see the fishnet grid again, and it's the second and last time that we see it in the series. This time, John Delancey has really honed his performance, where he's making Q a lot funnier and more playful, and he kind of becomes the Q that we get to know and love after this episode, where he's flamboyant and funny.
Macro head with a micro brain.
There is a danger to him, but also a compassion, where he's willing to put Tasha Yar in the penalty box and push her and Picard to a certain point, but after that point, he sort of feels sorry for them.
Yeah, I always thought that deep down, Q just didn't have any friends. That he was like, he really likes, Picard, and he likes the crew of the Enterprise, and he wants to be kind of friends with them, right? In a weird sort of way. And I think there's an episode later on where they kick him out. Q gets kicked out, and of the continuum, he's like, "I'm going to show you the universe. Come on, why don't you, let me be part of your crew?" And if I remember correctly, you really get a sense that he genuinely wants that. But I don't really remember the episode that well, so I could be totally.
I'm not gonna correct you, but you're wrong.
Yeah, he's like misremembering 2 different episodes.
Oh, am I? No, but there's an episode where he gets kicked out of the Q continuum, right?
Yeah, there is. And then there's another episode where he tries to join the crew.
No, I thought when he got kicked out of the Q continuum, he
comes to the Enterprise because that's the only place he thinks he has a friend.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's my point. Oh, Alan just made my point for me. Thank you very much, Alan. I really appreciate it.
But he doesn't join him to help him, explore the universe.
That's a different episode where he comes in. He says, "I want to be part of the crew. I'll show you around." And that's the Borg episode where he introduces him to the Borg. When Picard says, "We don't need you," he's like, "Yeah."
I think the stuff at the start was kind of necessary because my interpretation of all of that stuff was, like the actual game part of it was Q was setting up a situation where Riker would have to make a choice, like he ended up making. Right, so all of this was to kind of essentially it was a setup, right? It was setting up Riker so that he got to that moment where he had to choose to save his friends using his powers.
But the whole mining disaster thing, that could have been the perfect setting to do that test, and they could have put the crew in more peril, in a rescue attempt, and there could have been all sorts of more interesting ways to do it than that foolish battle.
I never knew that you hated this episode so much, Alan. We've watched it so many times together. I thought we were having a good time, but all this time you.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I have a good time watching it, but it is bad. It is bad. Like when I look at it, I'm like, it's bad.
You hate this episode as much as
it's bad.
At least the front half is bad, but again, I like the later stuff when it gets more to him and his moral dilemmas.
The fact that you hate it so much is making me like it more.
Well, okay, I'm glad something good come from my hate.
Alan, you hate this episode as much as Namir hates Discovery.
Well, I mean, I think it's just it's probably one of the weaker entries in the first season. When I look at the first season as a whole, I think, yeah.
It's funny because I definitely don't think it's as good as some later.
I think there's good moments, but overall there's a lot of crap in here. That's all.
I feel like I always think of it as being kind of not a high point, but like a upward blip in comparison to Code of Honor, Naked Now, Last Outpost, Justice, The Battle. I think this episode is better than all those episodes.
I mean, I would put it on par with The Battle. I really liked The Battle. I thought it was a good episode. I think I did. I don't remember now. To be honest,
I put The Battle above this. That was the best.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But it does feel like they're finding their groove a little bit with these first season episodes. Like they're finding their rhythm. Right. This episode is very comparable to other good episodes in the season. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see. We still have a ton of episodes left to go. But, one of the things that always strikes me about the next gen episodes is that there's a lot going on. Like, they're really dense, right? Like, they're plot heavy, but in a good way. Like there's always really great character moments. And I can't help but think that if you took this episode and somebody made it today, it would run across 3 hours. And I think that maybe that it's kind of a lost art, like, and I have to give credit to this episode for really doing that, for really telling an encapsulated story with a really great core idea in a really effective way. Criticisms aside, right? There's always going to be things that we can poke holes at, but ultimately for me, it was a really good story. I enjoyed watching it, and I enjoyed the character developments and everything that we learned about, Riker and Q and the crew.
And Klingon sex.
So I think Alan is right. There's a lot of cheesy things in it, and things that are awkward. I still enjoy the episode. And my only real criticism I feel story-wise of the episode is how fast Riker switches. I love his progression where he's offered the power of Q. He uses it once. Then Picard has a little one-on-one with him. He says, "Look, you can't use this power anymore." And Riker's like, "I won't. I promise. I'll never do it again." And it felt like you need a little time after that. But literally, like 5 seconds later, he's like, "What? A dead child? And I should have never done this." And then as soon as he's angry, he already becomes corrupted and flips, and he starts calling Picard Jean-Luc and being kind of arrogant, and he puffs out his chest and all this kind of stuff, where it happens very, very, very fast. Oh, and I just wanted to go back for a second and say, although all the crew dying on the fake planet is effective, I think it's funny how they die in the way that they shot, because they all get bayoneted, but all like really in slow motion, like where Worf is like, "Rah!" and then and then Wesley's like, "Ah!" and he grabs it.
What was Wesley going to do? I don't know why Wesley ran over to Worf, because I'm like, what's he going to do? He's got no med kit. He probably can't pull him away. Like, I don't know what he's thinking he was going to do, and then of course that's just an opportunity to just bayonet Wesley, because I think the writers probably just wanted to do that. It's like, fine excuse to do it.
Yeah, I figured. I saw that scene. I was like, Alan's gonna really enjoy that part.
Oh, I do. Yeah. I know I shouldn't like a child, a child getting impaled, but I mean, he's aggravating.
Poor Wesley. I like Wesley.
Oh, he gets better later on, but yeah, in the first season, he's just so.
Okay, so let's get to the final scene. So the final scene is my favorite part of the episode, when Riker now decides to grant everyone's wish on the bridge. And I have a really hard time picking what is my favorite moment, because it's like a highlight. It's like a smorgasbord of between hey, not bad, Wes. And
it's moments like that make me realize why Geordi never had a girlfriend, never had a steady girlfriend.
What are you implying? Are you implying that he doesn't actually have something wrong with his eyes? He just wants the glasses for the X-ray vision?
No, well, okay, I'll chime in on here, because this scene had one of the really good moments in this episode, which was Geordi getting his vision. Like, that was a nice scene, and you were very happy for him to be experiencing this, because obviously, I believe he was born blind. I don't think so he's never seen anything with normal vision. So that was like, it was a very nice character moment, and I will agree that's one of the parts of this episode I really enjoyed. And it's kind of like the insurrection scene where he sees a sunrise, and like, I always get a little choked up when Geordi gets to see a sunrise in Insurrection. So I was happy for him, but the other two wishes, oh man, yeah, that was awkward. Because it was like, that grown up version of Wesley didn't look anything like Will Wheaton.
Well, they couldn't have predicted. I wonder if the writers or if the casting director, later 20 years from that episode, looks back and goes, "Oh, we were really, really off the mark."
and the fact that he still has Will Wheaton's voice. He's talking, and I'm like, oh, it's a little 15-year-old kid talking in a 25, 30-year-old body.
Commander Riker, it's too soon for this.
So I'm like, why wouldn't he be talking in an adult voice? Like, well, I guess Will Wheaton does sound same now as he did then, so I don't know.
That's a very long and very complicated story.
And Geordi and his odd, flirtatious comment about it.
Hey, Wes, not bad.
Hey, not bad. And then, the Klingon sex. That was...
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that was a Gene Roddenberry contribution to the episode.
Oh, it feels like it was too. And I'm like, why would he engage in that in front? Because he's like, is this what your idea of sex? I'm like, this is sex. And he's like, it's like, why are you doing this in front of your coworkers? That just seems inappropriate.
It definitely doesn't age well.
Oh man.
Although when we watched it the first time, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. I was never like, that's not right. But now, I'm very much like, that's not right.
It's what is it? BDSM? Is that what it is? It's like a BDSM. Yeah. What is that like when you have sex with the handcuffs on?
Rough sex. Yeah.
Yeah, that's BDSM.
BSDM.
What's
what's
BDSM?
BDSM?
Bondage,
BMSD?
Domination, submission.
We're just, we're obviously not on the internet enough.
Just rough sex.
Right, and that's what that whole sequence is, and it's every time there's sex inserted in these episodes. I mean, they're human; they're gonna have sex. We understand that, but the way that they're inserted in each of these episodes is always inappropriate and very awkward, like. And such a funny choice to like, hey, Worf's horny. That's like what Riker's thinking. Worf is horny. They veil it in the companion. You need companionship.
Proud warrior Worf, without a single tie to his own kind.
And the only reason that Riker knows that is because at some point Worf told him that. Right, so if I was Worf, I would have been like, "I told you that in confidence."
It's like, I have no
now everybody
for it in my
knows. That's right.
I told you that in confidence that I like BDSM. I like slapping women around and having sex. And
oh man,
yeah. Does anybody else watch that episode or that scene and think that what happens at the very end of that when she crawls back up the ramp and she reaches out that she's gonna grab his penis? But then he goes, stop!
He should have said stop before it even started. It's like we can't be doing this here because it's in front of everybody. I'm like, because it's the equivalent of two humans tearing off each other's clothes and starting to kiss and fondle each other.
Yeah.
And it's like, we wouldn't do that in front of our coworkers, or at least I hope we wouldn't.
Well, I guess it depends on your job. It's really, really profession specific.
Well, and it's funny because we see, where no one has gone before, you see people's fantasies, and then you kind of see it again, and you have Worf with his pet Targ, and then Worf with his slave girl or whatever. And I often get those two episodes confused, or those two scenes confused, because which one is the one where he almost has sex on the bridge, and which one's the one where there's a pig on the bridge, Because they're very similar.
Yeah. Do you get the details confused too?
he punches the pig, and he pets the woman.
Well, anyway, that was an awkward 20 seconds of the episode for sure. But I liked the data scene, and the Geordi scene, right, where Data's like, I know what you're gonna offer me, I don't want it, right?
Yeah.
I think that was really smart.
Although I would have liked to see Data as a human for 2 seconds.
I don't know, what would he have looked like?
Well, he would look like Brent Spiner. You get to see, you kind of see what he looks like as a human.
I remember when I watched this episode for the first time, and they were going through, I thought he was gonna try everybody. And then I got so excited because I was like, "Oh, he's gonna get to Picard, and he's gonna give Picard hair." But it didn't happen. And then I realized that was faulty because he doesn't look good with hair.
We're gonna get to see Picard with hair in season 5 in the episode called
Hair.
I want to go back 1 second because you said something really interesting to me in comparing this episode to Where No Man Has Gone Before, which is the original series second pilot. And it was interesting that you brought that up because I was thinking the same thing when I watched it this time, that it was very similar to that episode, in that they both say the line, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And they both handle that progression really well. And considering that the first season of Next Generation often was going back and plucking elements of the original series, they did a good job in this episode not to do that, not to just lift the situation from Where No Man Has Gone Before and really do something much more original. and I really like the resolution of this episode where Riker gives the powers to his friends and they reject the powers, and he has that moment when he goes, "Oh, I'm such an idiot." And I really relate to that. I really relate to being an idiot. I really relate to this of those moments in your life where you go, "I was wrong," and instead of and feeling dumb about it, but at the same time feeling like I'm smarter because of this thing.
Yeah, and I like that too, and I also like how Picard knows exactly that that's how it's going to end up, right? He has enough experience that he's like, I know my crew, I know these people, I know exactly how this is going to play. And it's because he's a good captain, right? He understands his crew. He's a good mentor to Riker. So I think that was a really good character moment between the two of them, and just kind of defining a little bit of what their relationship is like, and what his relationship is to the rest of the crew. I think we talked at some point about why he's a good captain, and he's a good captain because he understands his people.
It played out exactly as it should have, and I think that part of the episode played well for me. I mean, other than the wishes that he granted, but the concept that he would offer this stuff to the crew and they would reject it was this is what I would like to see more of that in this episode. Like, cut out the first half, and focus on tempting Riker with the powers between the rescue mission to the mining colony and maybe putting the crew in some sort of peril there where he would have to use the powers to save the crew, and the choices of saving the colonists. That's the meat of the episode, and I wish that was the whole thing, but I think the writers just thought that wasn't exciting enough or something. So
no, I would argue that I think the thing that I liked about the episode was that it wasn't just about throwing obstacles in Riker's way, right? Like I like that the episode had a little bit of variety, and I the episodes of Next Gen that I like are the ones that do that, right? Like even where no one has gone before, right? Like you think it's starting off as one type of episode, right? Like there's an alien on board and they're trying to optimize the nacelles or the engines or whatever, but then it turns into this whole other thing. And that's kind of the same way with the first episode with the Borg, right? You think it's one thing and it turns into something completely different, but it all kind of hangs together, right, as one solid story. So
what are you talking about? What episode with the Borg?
Yeah, when the Borg is first introduced, when Q tosses them.
You're talking about an episode in the future. Okay.
Yeah. Did you think I meant this episode?
Well, I wasn't really sure what we were talking about. I was like, "Are you talking about Picard?"
No, but I get what he's saying. Yeah, because that episode kind of started with Q trying to join the crew, and that was that storyline went for a while, and then it turned into a confrontation with the Borg, and it was like two different episodes.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Right,
I get what he's saying.
I wasn't sure if you were having a seizure or not.
God. All right, are you guys done?
Yes.
Okay.
Make it so.
So I think Next Generation does that really well, right? Where the episode starts off as one thing, and you kind of think you know where it's going, and then it does a turn a little bit, right? And it's still, the themes are still there, but it surprises you, right? The episode surprises you. And I don't think the later, Discovery and other later shows do that quite as well. I think that this episode has all of those characteristics, which I personally enjoy. I don't know. Alan doesn't seem to really enjoy that, but I really enjoy that when I'm surprised by Star Trek, which is why I don't like Discovery, because it's not surprising. It's pretty boring.
He's so judgmental for shows he's never watched. Like, he says, "Oh, the later ones." Like, but I haven't watched Deep Space Nine, I haven't watched Voyager, and I don't watch Discovery.
No. I'm judging Voyager and Deep Space Nine on the episodes that I have watched, right? And man, Discovery, I've watched a lot of Discovery until I was just like, nah, I'm done with this. But I know very clearly that the episodes that I like of Next Generation are the ones that do that, and Next Gen does it really well.
So what would you guys rate this episode? Let's go with Ellen.
I'm probably going to go with a 5 out of 10. Again, because I liked half of it. So that's where I'm going with this. I enjoyed the first part, but I mean the production value is so bad that just takes me right out of it. And I'm just making fun of it. I'm just sitting there like hate watching it, just teasing it the whole time, and then it becomes good. So I said, because half of it was good, I'm giving it a 5 out of 10.
Initially I was going to give it a 6, but I can't give it a 6 because Alan gave it a 5. I guess I'm going to have to go with a 7. All right, I'm going to give it a 7. A reluctant.
The way you're gushing about it.
No, it's not a perfect episode. It's just it's a good episode. I'm going to give it a 7. I'm going to give it a 7.
I also would give it a 7. I felt that it's kind of, I always enjoy the episode. There are some things that don't work about it, but it's really, for me, always about the enjoyment level, and is the idea good? And there's some really great scenes in this episode, even if they're cheesy or weird. Like, it's just like the episode that keeps on giving. I don't know how many times I've seen it, but the penalty box never gets old, and the hey Wes, not bad never gets old, and the little vicious animal things. It's a good time. 7 out of 10. So we'll be back next week to review even more Star Trek The Next Generation. And next week is Data Lore, I think.
Whoa. That's a good one, I think.
I think it's a big goodbye or Haven, isn't it?
Oh. Well, we'll see.
I think it's Haven. I think Haven's next.
Hey, Wes. Not bad.
Just where is our future? The things we've done instead.